Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar series. If you have any questions during this presentation today, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to Crop Talk for July the 10th. And for today's Crop Talk, we're going to, I guess, see what's happening out in the field. And what I'm planning on doing is going through a few of the major crops, some of the things we've been seeing over the past week to 10 days, as well as some of the issues that we can, or things we might want to watch for over the next week or so. So I guess the big thing that's happened over the last couple days, I guess starting Monday through to last night, a lot of the area, a lot of the southern part of the province anyways, received some fairly significant amounts of rainfall. Boys of Ain, Pearson area, I know are reporting it. Their weather stations are reporting anywhere from 59 to 50, good 50 millimeters of rain. Melita, Scott Chambers recorded 108 mils at the Wado site at Melita. Then when you get up towards more of the Glenborough area, mountainside areas, they're in the 60s to 127 mils. And you could see how the system was working because it seemed to have been kind of circling through the Minnedosa area and back down towards the southern part of the province. And you could see the cutoff line was kind of that Oakburn, Russell area as you go north and west. And those areas only reporting 1.3 to 0.8 millimeters. So those areas not receiving much of the last rainfall that went through the area. Those numbers won't be reflected in this update here because most of this was done as of Monday, July the 8th. But when you see, take a look at the map again, like we look every week at, we're looking at the total rainfall accumulations, and we can see that some areas are definitely getting closer to their normal, but there still are areas that are below. But some of those areas receiving those rains yesterday, that'll definitely bring them up. And Carberry's an example of an area that got a little bit more yesterday, and even when you get into the Minnedosa area where it was around 64% of normal, the recent rainfalls are definitely going to help. Mountainside, they were at 97, and so their big rainfall there definitely is going to affect the amount of water that's laying in fields, I would imagine. And then when you look at some places like the Melita area where the Wado site is, they were at 75% of normal. So they're definitely going to be getting to closer to normal for next week's report. Looking at our growing degree days, and definitely the last week here, or 4 or 5 days anyways of hot and warmer and humid conditions have definitely brought our growing degree days up. Evenings are staying warmer. We're having several evenings where we're in the 14s to 16 degrees Celsius range, and that's definitely helping and bringing those growing degree days up. And you can definitely notice it in some of the crops that are liking the heat and humid conditions, and more like your corns and sunflowers, they're definitely stretching out. And when we look at a little bit into the soybean crops a little bit later, definitely seeing a notice in them as well. This is the rainfall event that happened on Monday, and you can see that most of it was more concentrated to the eastern side of the province. And this one also had some hail issues with it that we got some reports of. So some damage with hail, but on Monday, a lot of the rainfall was in the eastern side of the province. And then when you looked at the fusarium head blight map that came out the following day, you could see that area was in the high to extreme. Now, considering what we received last night in rainfall, I would say that this for tomorrow's map, or later on today, I guess the map is usually put out later out this afternoon. If you were to go to that map this afternoon, I'm thinking there's going to be a fairly large portion of the southwest of Manitoba here that's going to be go from a medium to high risk of fusarium potential, because we have the humid conditions, and we also have a lot of moisture over the last 24 hours that's going to keep that canopy fairly wet. So looking at some of the crops, when we talked last week, we were talking a little bit about diseases and timing for application for fusarium control, and I mentioned it with the fusarium map there, that the precipitation we had is definitely going to be favorable for fusarium, and the high humidity temperatures, favoring infections range from 16 to 30 degrees Celsius, and with the optimums between 25 and 28. So pretty much bang on what we've been receiving for temperatures over the last 3 to 4 days. I guess the biggest thing with fusarium is going to be the timing right now. And as you can see in the picture there, I took the other day, this wheat plant here this was actually a tiller, and so it wasn't the main stem. And you could see that it was getting to the point of almost completion of flowering. What will happen with your head is a lot of times when your head comes out, flowering will start in the middle of the head and work its way up and down. And then once you start seeing these anthers hanging, that means the bloom is closed and the flower is broken off. So that means your flowering has been completed. When that happens, you're past the point where any fungicide is going to help you for fusarium control, and it would be more now spraying for disease control. When you look in a field like this one, which was the same field I was in, you can see that a lot of the heads are pretty much covered with anthers, and so at this point, spraying to control fusarium is probably, I guess if it was happening when I was out in the field, or that happened the day before or the evening before, that would been pretty much close enough timing that things were going to work. But anywhere from a day to 2 days before seeing this type of site in your field when you go out there would have been better timing. Again, just because it's you're spraying and you're not getting disease control, but you might be you're not getting fusarium control, or you might be getting disease control. And as you can still see, some of these leaves are showing some disease, and spraying a fungicide would definitely help in keeping those flag leaves out there and helping in the filling of the head. So just because you might have missed the timing for application of fusarium, the leaf disease control still might be a factor or something for you to be watching for. The other thing is that a lot of times when, especially this year, we're seeing a lot of issues with our variable staging in the field. And because of that, the applications are a lot more difficult, and we talked a bit about that last week. And I've been in more fields where we're having heads that are completely done flowering, and we've got also heads that are just starting to come out of the flag leaves. So, those situations, there still may be some advantages to spraying for fusarium, especially if the first heads that were out, conditions weren't favorable for fusarium, but we might be getting into favorable conditions right now, and those later heads coming out might be the ones that have a better chance of getting infected. When we were also talking about cereal crops last week, John Gavoski was on, and we were talking about wheat midge. The luxanid was a bug that looked very similar and sometimes gets confused with the wheat midge. So there's a picture of a luxanid that I was able to get, and the wheat midge right there comes from our Manitoba Ag website. So you can see definitely a a difference in size and more of a mosquito to more like a smaller fly. I guess the biggest thing with the growing with the wheat midge is it's when it starts to emerge and becomes an issue, and usually becomes an issue when we're in the probably in the the 800 to 900 growing degree days. And right now, when you look at where we were back at in the in the season, our growing degree days were probably more in the highest would be the mid 600s or the low 600s. So we definitely are in a situation where we're kind of in the 10% of the adults have emerged to start would have emerged to start causing damage. And I guess with the timing wise for wheat midge, it's very similar to the same timing as fusarium. So those glooms on the head need to be open, and so basically when you're seeing the anthers already, that means that gloom is closed. So your kernel is going to be closed up and inside those glooms, so the midge will not be able to get in there and lay its egg as easy. So the percentage of damage is definitely going to go down. As well, John did mention last week that at that time the larvae, once the gloom closes and the seed starts to fill, the larvae tend not to. They just, I guess, the food situation for them isn't as good, and they just don't like that kernel as much. So the damage they do is definitely going to be less as well. And I did mention a little bit about leaf disease, and I took this picture in a crop that was heading out. And when you look in the bottom of the canopy, there is definitely leaf disease down there. Most cases right now, I think a lot of the cereal crops have been sprayed, and a lot of producers are past the point of this. There are some later crops that I would tell producers, to keep watch out for, because these diseases can move up out of the plant fairly fast. And basically what we're seeing here is a lot of tan spot and septoria. Tan spot usually identified with the browner spot with the yellow halo around it, and septoria would be more of an irregular spot. So majority of what we're seeing here is tan spot, probably some septoria right up there on that leaf right there. So before we leave cereals, one of the other questions I've been getting over the last week or so here has been another flush of weeds coming, and mainly in a lot of fields, a lot of volunteer canola, and in fields where kochia can be a problem, we're seeing a lot of kochia coming back in another flush. And you can see the picture at the top there. That's what some producers are seeing in fields, especially fields where we had a very uneven germination. Really fields that were sown, before end of April, that in that first 2 to 3 days of May, we're seeing that's where I'm seeing most of the issues. However, in most of those fields, a lot of the crop is either headed or is pretty much 80% or between 50 and 80% headed already. So to go out there with any product to try to control a lot of those flushes is going to be very difficult. First of all, to find a product that's registered at that time period. Got to be really careful with spraying at that time period for a couple of reasons. One is you'll affect the head, and a lot of times if you spray late and you see those heads that are bent over later on in the fall, those heads were affected by a lot of times affected by a late spray of chemical. The other thing is your pre-harvest interval, and that's something we need to watch, because a lot of products have at least a 30 to 60 day pre-harvest interval, and if you're spraying right now, you could run into some issues there. So I guess the big question is what do you do? I think for those guys, I think one of the things you're going to have to look at is probably a pre-harvest spray for sure. A lot of those canola plants and kochia plants are going to be green when the crop is getting close to being ready to harvest. Some guys are looking at a pre-harvest and then maybe a swathing just to get the crop dried down a little bit faster. I think as we get closer to harvest, those decisions will be a little bit easier to make as we see what kind of weather patterns we're in. If we're getting a good stretch of hot, dry weather, spraying and then waiting a few days and going in and swathing might be something somebody would look at doing. And I guess one of the other things is just you might need to prepare yourself to see some yellow patches showing up in your field as the canola starts to bolt and flower. It's going to start showing up in your crop, and the field might look a little bit messy for a while. But just some of the issues of uneven germination this year and slow emergence because of the cool conditions we had this spring. Okay, gonna switch crops here and go over and look at peas. And peas is probably one of the crops that I've been impressed the most with so far this year. It's developing fairly well. We're in the stage now where the majority of the fields are flowering and or starting to show pods already. And recent conditions have been really favorable for the disease, for the crop to grow. And however, I guess with those conditions, there's also really favorable for development of disease. And I think a lot of the pea fields have been sprayed for disease, and what we're looking for is, or what we're usually spraying for in peas is a disease called Mycosporella blight. And it'll usually start as these small purple type irregular blotches on the leaves. And what it does is it works very similar to what an ascochyta or blight would work on lentils. And at one time we had grown a lot of lentils in the province, and because the disease got to be such an issue, we actually stopped growing them. But the Mycosporella doesn't seem to be as devastating in peas, and with the use of some fungicides, we're able to keep it under control. Now, what'll happen sometimes is the infection, if it starts early enough, you'll get it to go from the leaves onto the stems, and then once it gets onto the stems, if the infection is severe enough, you'll get some plants that'll ripen prematurely and they won't produce any seed. If it doesn't happen, or if the disease happens a little bit later, and in this picture here that I took, the disease is happening a little bit later, and there's actually pod development and flowering started to happen on these plants already. What you could see later on during the growing season is you could see some small, those purple spots showing up on the pods. And in some cases where if they get on the pods early enough, they'll cause the pods to shrink and actually not even produce seed. Now that would be the extreme case. And in a lot of cases, what you'll see is you might see the staining or the lesions on the outside of the pod, and on the inside of the pod on the seed, you might see some staining of the seed. Now, a lot of times, probably the majority of the time, not a devastating disease for yield, but I think with use of a fungicide, we've been able to lower the incidence of Mycosporella and its damage. People that have sprayed, and most fields in the area have probably been sprayed about a week to 10 days ago. I think with the recent rains, depending on where you are and how much rain you got, and what we're going to see for weather over the next few days here, you might be inclined to go out there and look at the field and maybe see if you might want to do a second application just to help keep the disease at bay. It can come in fairly fast and can do damage fairly fast if it has the right kind of conditions. And right kind of conditions are going to be moist, damp canopy, which in most cases we're going to have, and heat with some humidity in it. and which is always good for growing fungus and disease. So, we're probably going to be in those situations. So maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea to go out there and assess your crop and see first of all if there's any disease showing up at all. If you can't find any of these purple spots on your leaves, or if it doesn't look like there's any disease in the field, you're probably going to be okay. But if you do have some issues out there, probably something to keep an eye on, and then maybe make the decision if it's worth another application. Well, we're talking about peas. We should also talk about one of the things that usually shows up on a yearly basis is aphids, and aphids tend to the pea aphid seems to do or show up every year in peas, and I think in some years, depending on the amounts and depending on the area, we do see some spraying happening. But I think the biggest issue we have with aphids is where they are on the plant. And when you go out there and if you're seeing quite a few aphids, I think the biggest thing is to assess where they are located on the plant. If you get them congregating in large numbers on the flowering part of the plant, it can cause the abortions of the flower and therefore reducing yields. Aphids, develop from birth to maturity in anywhere from 5 to 50 days, depending on the weather. They like the kind of weather we're going to get, the weather where it's decently warm and humid. The aphids are, once they're out and eating, they start producing young, and the young are born. They're not from eggs. They are born live. They start feeding right away, and so you can get numbers increasing fairly fast in fields. So while you're out scouting peas for disease, start looking around for aphids. One of the things I usually like to do is if you're walking across a pea field and you come out and your pants are not only wet because of the moisture on the field, but they're also a little bit sticky, you'll probably have some aphids out there, and just wouldn't hurt to take a closer look at them, at the count numbers. Now, there's a couple ways of doing it. Go out into the field and take a look at your plants. If you're seeing 2 to 3 aphids per 8 inches of plant, then you're probably in a situation where you need to be definitely keeping an eye on them. If you go out with a sweep net and you're getting 9 to 12 aphids per sweep at flowering time, again, you're in a situation where you should be keeping a real close eye on them, because those type of numbers are numbers that are probably economical enough to warrant a spraying or be concerned anyway. So this year, with the pea crop looking fairly good and prices seem to be holding, it might be something to keep an eye out on. Again, they're not going to be in every field, so definitely don't just go out and start blanket spraying my peas because there might be some bugs in them. Go out, do the counts, and make sure they're actually there and the numbers are there, efficient or high enough to warrant spraying. Last week, I had John mention alfalfa weevil, and there was several fields, or I was getting calls regarding the alfalfa fields not going into flower, or they seem to be going out of flower and turning white. So we had John talk about the alfalfa weevil. I went out this past week to a couple of the fields that I was getting some calls on, just to get a few pictures and to see what kind of damage was being done. And here's a picture of an alfalfa field that you can see the whitish tinge to it. And when you look a little bit closer, we're definitely seeing the larvae of the alfalfa weevil. And it was the whiteness of the crop. When you look there, you can see where it's happening, because they don't usually eat right through, but they skim the plant or skim the leaf, and they leave a kind of a whitish kind of almost like a membrane left of the leaf, and so that gives it the whitish effect. Plus, when they get onto the flowering parts, they cause the flowers to abort, and that's giving you the whitish tinge to it. So the damage is probably not as bad. I guess I shouldn't say as bad. I guess if they're in your field, they can be bad, and you need to get out there and cut and get the crop off as quick as you can. But the widespreadness of the issue, I guess, wasn't as big as we first thought, and so. The lot of fields I was in, I wasn't finding any at all, but there was some fields that were definitely showing the effects. And as John mentioned last week, cutting is the best. Once you go in there and cut, they'll fall to the ground. And if they have nothing to feed off of, they're probably going to die. I think with the recent rainfalls, we're going to see alfalfa grow back fairly quick. So you may need to watch the second grow. If you have issues, you need to be watching the regrowth because they could be moving on to new growth as fast as it comes up. Okay, switching from the peas and alfalfa to some of the things we're seeing in canola. And I guess it's that time of year to start looking for the diamondback moth larvae. We're starting to see some show up. I found this guy the other day, and so they're around. The numbers are still fairly low, but I thought it wouldn't be a bad idea just to talk a little bit about them and make sure that we're out there when we're scouting, checking for them. They're going to do a lot of feeding. Numbers this go around, depending on the generations. If we get another generation, we could see effects a little bit later where they'll do a lot more damage. But right now, what we're probably seeing is the first generation, and it's the numbers are fairly low, and they're still fairly hard to find. It wasn't easy finding these guys. And what I usually do is look for feeding and look on the undersides of the leaves. They're usually more feeding on the undersides of the leaves, so it's easier to find them that way. And just start looking around for them and do some counts and see what kind of numbers you're seeing. Right now, I would imagine that most of the numbers are fairly low, and but again, we've always had hotspots, so it's definitely time to start your scouting. Todd Drummond sent me this picture yesterday, and he was out in some fields in the southwest and finding something a little bit different, something we normally don't look a lot for, but it makes a lot of sense to be looking for them. And you can see where these the flower or the flowering part of the canola plant, you can see where there's a black type hole in it, and the diamondback moth was actually feeding on the blossoming part of the canola plant. And he said that when he checked those out, he was actually finding diamondbacks on the plant. And so something to watch for. A lot of times we will see aborted flowers, and we won't think about it. Maybe the potential for maybe insect damage. We'll talk about heat blasting. We'll talk about nutrient deficiencies, and we'll see just little stalks where the pod should have developed. That's basically just an aborted flower. So this could be something that we should be watching for. So again, as you're out in the field and you're seeing something like that, definitely take a closer look at that as well. Here are some of the numbers on the traps that we've been seeing, and these numbers are brought in from across the province, and John Gavlosky puts them together and gives us some trap count numbers. And as you can see, numbers through the southwest have been fairly low. The Inner Lake and a little bit to the northwest, the numbers are a little bit on the higher side. But I guess the big thing that John always mentions with these the trap counts is that they're strictly just to let us know if the adults are there to lay the eggs to start the problem off. And I guess this is enough to tell us that the numbers are around this year. I think we still need to be scouting for the larvae to see the numbers of larvae we're counting and to see what kind of damage and where they're located on the plant. Regarding the Bertha armyworm, we're also starting. I guess this is about the third week for those traps, and we're seeing some numbers starting to build especially again in the northwest. And I'm wondering if that has to do with some of the really strong winds we've had earlier on this year, where they've taken maybe some of the adults a little bit farther. But the trap count numbers so far are still in the low risk zone for most of the areas, and these aren't the only areas where we have traps. Traps are located basically throughout the area. John usually just reports the highest numbers in a couple of the regions. So again, we're getting our highest counts in the northwest region. These are what the Bertha armyworm traps look like. So if you're driving by a field and you see one of these sitting on the edge of the field, that's what that trap is. It's a Bertha armyworm trap. And still staying with canola, a lot of canola is being sprayed right now with fungicide for sclerotinia control. And we talked about that last week with David Kaminsky. And so there's a picture of the mushrooms, the inset picture there, where the spores would have opened up and flown up into the air to infect the petals. And I took this picture showing as to how the infection would happen. So basically, the spores from these small tiny mushrooms, which are about the size of a lead pencil, the lead of the lead pencil, when they open up, the spores land on the flowering parts of the plant. And then after the flowering is done, those petals have been infected with the spores, and they fall down. And when they fall down into the cracks of the plant like this, they start to infect. The infection will start right in this area here, and that's a lot of the times how infections of the plant start. Now, if it happens early in the season, so if it happens when the infection happens to the flowers on the first go of flowers, you could see a lot of those petals falling closer to the ground and the leaves on the ground, and that's where you can get a lot of times where you have whole plants that have been infected with sclerotinia, and the plant basically just ripens prematurely and doesn't produce anything. If it happens later on some of the branches and some of the upper branches, you may see those upper branches being infected, and the plant still producing seed on most of the plant, but where the upper branches got infected, you may see some reduction in seed or some poor quality seed. Okay, leaving canola and going into soybeans, a crop that is really taking off this last week to 10 days here, and you can see the crop from the roads just every day is just growing. And currently most of the soybeans out this way are anywhere from the 5 to 6 trifoliate, with some of the fields in the early flowering stage or the R1 stage. And being that June 21st was the longest day of the year, that usually triggers flowering, and we are starting to see flowers show up in a lot of the fields right now. Even though it starts to flower, the plants will continue to grow and will fill in the canopy, but I am seeing some of the flowers closer to the ground. You can see where some of the flowers are going to start coming out on this one, and we're right about the 3-inch mark sort of thing. So definitely can see where we're going to have some lower pods. Took this picture on the 9th, and again, you can see flowers showing up, and we're basically, when we consider July 11th of last year of 2018, some of those lower flowering parts were actually starting to produce pods already. So we're a little bit behind, but it's amazing how fast they're going to catch up. So I think we're still needing a fairly good fall, but I think the plants are definitely moving along, and we're going to be seeing pods like this probably in a week to 10 days here. Probably for the next crop talk, if we're out there looking, we would find pods starting to form on those lower flowers. So when you're out in your soybean fields right now is a real good time to check for nodulation. You're out there checking for a lot of things right now, and weed control is one that I see a lot of guys checking to see if another application is needed. But right now there should be anywhere from 8 to 20 large nodules per plant just prior to flowering, and so it's a good time to get out there. When you're looking at their plant and you pull out your root, and I guess one of the biggest things, first of all, is when you go to pull out that root, you got to be either dig it up is probably the best thing to do. Don't just grab the plant and pull it out, because a lot of times when you do that, you'll break off these nodules. They won't stay on; they'll just stay back in the soil. But when you look at this one here, you see there's nodules that are on the taproot, and then there's nodules that are forming on the side roots. And the nodules on the taproot are probably a result, or usually are a result of your inoculation and how well your inoculation worked. So basically, you pull that plant out, you can see if you did a good job of inoculating your seed. And then if you see the side ones going out, that means that that's happening from the bacteria that's in the soil and helping it develop nodules. So real good time to check for nodules and how well your inoculation worked. Those nodules, you need to be able to, or what a good thing to do would be to cut them in half when you pull them out of the ground. So I think the one I'm showing there is this one right here. And when you cut them in half, you'll see if it's pink on the inside, pink to red, that means that they're working. And you want to see that, because that means it's producing nitrogen for your plant and helping it grow. So cut some of those open, and just to see the pink color and see how well they're working. Usually if they're this type of size and shape, the majority of them are going to be working for you. And a lot of times if you see a plant that's maybe not quite as healthy, some of these aren't that large, and even the outside color isn't as white as it is there. Okay, some insects that we're seeing in soybeans, and got a few calls regarding this one here. You'll see a netting on the leaves, and you'll see a lot of droppings or waste material from the worm on the leaves as well. Almost look like small mouse turds. And basically what we're seeing is the painted lady butterfly larvae, and this is what it looks like. And it's feeding on the leaves. A lot of times when it's feeding, you'll see that it doesn't really touch the veins. It'll feed between the veins of the plant. And sometimes when you see the plant ripped off this much, and you see like a lot of feeding has been done, and then you get some wind whipping, and that's what breaks off that. But a lot of these will feed mainly just between the veins of the plant. And I guess, yeah, that's what this is saying here, basically. And a lot of times they'll feed on thistle plants in the field too. So if you've got thistles in your soybeans, they'll be out there feeding on them as well. They have lots of hosts, as it says there. They got around 100 different hosts, including sunflowers, soybeans, corn, alfalfa, canola. So a lot of the plants, a lot of the crops that we grow, they'll feed on. You tend to see them more I tend to find them a lot on Canada thistle. And so if you're out in the fields, if you've got Canada thistle in your soybeans, you'll definitely be seeing them. And they usually don't do a whole lot of damage. Easy to identify with their, the black spikes along their back and the yellow striping on either side. They'll form a webbing like that, and a lot of times they bring the leaves together, and their numbers can be high in some areas. And when you walk in, they can, in some spots, look like they're doing a fair bit of damage. Usually what happens is the plant just outgrows them and they're not much of an issue, and really not something that needs to be worried about spraying. And so not really anything economical about it. It's just that it's out there and it's visible. There's the adult. So the butterflies arrive in June, lay their eggs, and July, the end of June, beginning of July, the larvae start feeding. So that's what we're seeing now. Basically in August, the new butterflies will emerge and the populations die off. So there has been some numbers put together for thresholds for if you are seeing an extreme amount. And they're talking about soybeans, about 25 to 30% defoliation prior to blooming. So if you're looking at your plants there and you're seeing 25% defoliation, then you would be looking at something that might need spraying. And after blooming, or when you're after blooming in pods at about 20% defoliation. If you remember back when we were talking about flea beetles in canola and talking about percentage of damage, and you look at these leaves here, we're probably in the low 5% defoliation. So again, a lot of defoliation needs to occur before you get into that 25 to 30%. So that's probably why the economic threshold is usually not that major for the painted lady butterfly, because the amount of damage they do is never very significant. Another guy that we've been seeing out there is the blister beetle, and I've been getting a few calls about him. Again, another one that we usually find feeding on thistles. This guy, when I got him, he was on the edge of the field on some of a canola field, actually on some volunteer cereal. Again, numbers are usually low. They'll feed on the leaf material, but they don't really do any economic damage. So nothing too much to be concerned about. They're a very showy beetle. A lot of times they'll be colorful like this. Sometimes they're not quite as colorful. They'll be a blacker or a blackish, more of a blackish color. But yeah, they usually can get fairly large. And when you see a large number of them together, they look like they can do a fair bit of damage. But again, usually feeding on thistles, so a good thing. So that's gone through most of the crops that I wanted to talk about today. There's, I guess, a lot of things happening with corn and sunflowers as well, but I think they've experienced a pretty good week of just general growth, and I think the hot, humid conditions are only helping them go, and we really haven't seen too many other issues going on. So I guess with that, I want to mention a few of the things that are coming up in July here. July is the month of tours and field days. So the Manitoba Pulse and Soybean Growers have a Smart Day on July the 23rd from 9 till 3 o'clock at the Ian Morrison Research Farm in Carman. If you could register, would be great. And they're going to be touring a lot of the pulse and soybean crops. So definitely would be a a good thing to look at, being that with the increase in soybeans and peas in Manitoba over the next few years, keep on top of some of the things that they're doing there. The crop diagnostics school is continuing, and we are into day 2 of the crop diagnostics school. The weather maybe hasn't cooperated as much, but things are still going on. You'll need to call. I'm not 100% sure if the other dates are full yet, but there is contact information on the page right here to find out if any of the days are still open. So if you're still interested in going, there is next week. There is Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So make the call, find out what days are still open, and book. There's definitely a lot of good information going on there. Mentioned it the last couple times as well, the organic crop production field day going on the 16th and 17th in Carmen as well. And this is going to be, I guess it's next week as well. So the same days as the diagnostic school. So if you're in the area and want to take in a 2-day event, diagnostic school one day and organic days the next day, that would work. And there's the contact information and the locations for that. The Wado Field Day, hopefully we didn't get too much rain that it'll affect some of the plots, but Scott mentioned they got over 100 mils there yesterday. There was a video he put up in Melita where water was running down the streets. So, but the field day is on July the 30th. If you're interested in going, you can register by calling Scott, and there's his contact information there, and always a fairly good tour. And the seasonal crop reports. Definitely look for the Fusarium forecast that's going to come out later this afternoon after the recent rainfall events. We are going to definitely see that be on more of a medium to high risk. Insect and weed and disease updates. John, Dave, and Tammy are constantly updating their reports, so look at there. And if you're wanting to know the weather in your area, the update maps are there on our website. The extension people for Manitoba, here's the people that I work with and are always able to give you a hand if you've got questions. So if something's going on in your area that you need some help with, definitely give these people a call. And join us next week, July the 17th. The CropTalk webinars are being recorded and are being put onto, here's the links. So if you would like to view the past or today's webinar, just go to those links and you'll be able to, later on today or tomorrow, today's webinar will be put up, but the other webinars are up there. With that, that's the end of this week's webinar, and see you next week.